Ladies and gentlemen, Vijay Talwar.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. Looking forward to the next half hour or so. And I'm in my role now as the CEO of EMEA for Foot Locker. But as of this week, I also have just stepped into an interim role as the global CIO of the company, as our CIO just recently left the organization. Although this presentation was done before I took on my new role, so I'll be talking a little bit less about technology. But as I am talking about the from clicks to bricks, this is a little bit probably more about me personally, as much as it is about Foot Locker as well. And so when I joined Foot Locker, I joined as the head of digital and ran the digital business for footlocker.com, champsports.com, footaction.com, Eastbay. We actually had about 8 different sites that had over $1 billion business. But one of the things we realized very quickly is that the customer is no longer interested in shopping in one channel, and they cut across multiple channels. And so we started to really focus on how do we take advantage of the clicks inside the store environment? How do we create this sort of omni-channel experience? And so essentially, we blew up that entire digital P&L, and today we have actually regional-based omni-channel P&L. So that what I do for my full-time job is the omni-channel business, so the store business and the online business for Foot Locker in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that's why the title around the from clicks to bricks, which some of you might have thought we got backwards, but it does apply to sort of where I've come from and where I'm at today. To start my story, I will just tell you a quick story about what really started in 2002 when my wife and I both joined Nike and worked there for the next 5 or 6 years, her for 5, me for 6 years. And then we kind of left that and actually traveled around the world and worked in different continents. And came back to Chicago, actually, where my son was born when he was 13 years old in 2013. And the story, I just want you to kind of give you some context around what Foot Locker actually does, because a lot of people just think of us as a shoe retailer, and most of you probably typally buy 1 or 2 pairs of sneakers a year. But the customers that we sell to are the customers that are buying 10, 15, 20, in some cases, 50 pairs of sneakers in 1 year. And you might be wondering, why would somebody want to buy 50 pairs of sneakers in any given year? And the reason is that this example is a perfect example for me. So our son was in high school. I was not at Foot Locker yet. I was working at Sears at the time in Chicago. Our son came home and talked about how he needed to get this pair of shoes on the left, the blue Jordan 11s, the North Carolina blue Jordan 11s, and they were very, very rare and very difficult to get. Well, his birthday was coming up in January, and this was also around Christmas time, so I called a few friends at Nike and got him a pair of shoes for his birthday. He wore it to his first day of class, and the first week of January in 2013. And next thing he knew, he came home and he said, "Dad, you won't believe it. There were like 20 people around me today." And by the way, he's a new kid. He just moved from Seattle to Chicago. Didn't really know many kids, and all of a sudden he was like, his sense of belonging came from his sneakers. So long story short, I won't go into a lot of the details. The picture on the right, actually, you see his closet where you actually see this pair of shoes there on the top left of the right picture. But then you also see some of his shoes there, which many of these shoes are worth hundreds of dollars. And when I say hundreds of dollars, I don't mean a few hundreds. Is like, as an example, his most expensive pair of shoes is actually worth over $10,000, right? So again, I can answer questions about that. It comes up in the Q&A. I'm sure you're curious about why it is. I finally had to ask him to stop his business in 2016 when he was a senior in high school, and told him to move, to stop essentially buying and selling sneakers. But I will tell you this just as a simple one-line story or summary of the story. What happened is that we ended up having to send all his pairs to storage before we moved from the US to Europe. And his sneaker collection is at a minimum worth probably around $50,000 today. So how does this actually happen? So this is I'm sure some of you know, some of you probably have members of your family, friends, kids, others who, or maybe yourself, you're a sneakerhead. If you haven't seen the show on Netflix, I highly recommend watching this new show called Sneakerheads. It's definitely a good a good way to understand this industry and what happens in this industry. But here's another example of what happened. So there's a company out there called GOAT, another company called StockX, and a third company called Stadium Goods. What they all have in common is they all have valuations above $1 billion, right? GOAT is the one I'm using in the example because Foot Locker invested in GOAT a couple of years ago and has already seen a significant increase in the investment that we've made because of the increase in value of the company. And again, most of this is available from public information, so I can't share any sort of information that's not public. And GOAT is a private company, but you get the sense of it. So Stadium Goods got acquired about 2 or 3 years ago. StockX is still private, but had their last round was above $1 billion as well. And all these three are essentially a very, very, very small subset of what eBay used to do 10 years ago. And what they do is they sell you high-end, in the case of StockX, it's even high-end watches and high-end bags as well. So it's kind of like, for some of you might know Real or TradeZ or other websites like that, but these are really focused on sneakers. And the idea is you can buy sneakers either from retailers, you can buy directly from the brands like Nike and Adidas, or from retailers like Foot Locker or Champs or Foot Action. But at the end of the day, many of these sneakers have a very high resale value. So we didn't launch the sneakers, we can only sell them at the suggested retail price, and that's what we always do. But then there's marketplaces like the ones I'm talking about here, which is where consumers go and buy these shoes at a higher price. So this is just something that to keep in mind as you think about who we are as a company and what we do. So from that, I would get into the notion that, as you are aware, the customers are changing, but so are retailers. I'll start with a little piece of good news. So, we're obviously a pretty old retailer. We've been around for a long time. In fact, some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, but we are the only part of Woolworths that's actually still alive. So we were spun out of Woolworths before Woolworths went bankrupt many, many years ago. Foot Locker itself as a brand has been around for 45 years, but I believe our ticker symbol has been around for close to 100 years, if not longer. So and if you look at our last quarterly sales results that we published for the last publicly available quarter, our top line revenue in the midst of the pandemic was up 20%. Not 1%, 2%, 3%, it was like 19.6%, something like that. Right? And this includes, issues where we have to close down stores because of COVID, where there's some regions of the world that are open, some regions are closed. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that even though we are all kind of probably, at a personal level and from a company level, there's been a lot of change, and not all change is always necessarily good. In this case, this has been really, really good for our business. And part of that is the fact that people are wearing much more casual clothes, much more casual sneakers. People are walking more, people are running more, and that's just helped our business in general. So what I want to talk a little bit about is who our customer is. So our customers, because we're so focused on the 14 to 22-year-old customer, that's the customer we're really, really focused on. It's really moving right now from a Gen Y customer to a Gen Z customer. And I want to make this point, under both the Gen Y consumer base as well as the Gen Z consumer base, there are two subsets of either one of them. It's called the Gen Me customers and the Gen V customers. So there's two of these customer bases, and they're fundamentally different. But what's very different about the Gen Z versus the Gen Y is that most of the Gen Y were kind of the Gen Me customers, and there were a few Gen V customers. When you look at the Gen Z side of things, there's been a much bigger push towards the Gen V customers. And what is the difference? When you think about the Gen Me customers, it's, I want to make the world a better place for me to live in. The Gen V customers is, I want to make the world a better place for others to live in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, give you some more examples. But reality is, a lot of it is about, the Gen Me is about recognition, it's about belonging, it's about following the influencers, and it's a lot of the stuff that most of us are already doing our day-to-day marketing. The Gen V customers are actually about, let me have my own experience in the store. If I have a question, I'll come and ask you about it. I want to see a brand that's inclusive. I want to see a brand that supports sustainability. I want my freedom. I want to, my individuality to be recognized by the brand. So it's an interesting sort of change. And if you think about these customers, this is who many of us will be servicing as we think about the next decade, and as they become kind of the primary earners in their respective households as well. So let's talk a little bit more about these customers and who they are and what they do. So 68% of them want to make the world more equal, right? 73% of them say that they would rather help people than be rich. This is a pretty big difference between the Gen V that I talked about earlier and the Gen Me. The Gen Me is more focused on actually being rich. The Gen V, which is a bigger part of the Gen Z consumers, are much more focused on helping others. So again, I think it's an interesting way to kind of think about it. And then sustainability, I talked about that. 66% of them say sustainability is hugely important to them, right? And I'm sure you have your own personal experiences, but my daughter has been a vegetarian now for over 10 years, and it all started with her love for animals, right? And it's just at an individual level, right? Whether they move to being vegan or whether they want to wear sneakers that don't have any leather in it. There's all kinds of changes that we're kind of seeing in our marketplace, which has been caused by these customers. The important thing to remember, though, is that a lot of customers are I don't want to say pretending, but they're all of us are actually evolving or changing. But this generation also has a very, very, very high radar to figure out who's authentic and who's not, right? They don't necessarily want us to give them the marketing piece, the PR piece, and the storytelling piece, and not back it up with action, right? So I'll just call out to the middle of that page. 1/3 of the consumers have already stopped purchasing their longtime favorite brands, right? When you have the breakout today around loyalty, think about that for a second. This has never happened with another generation prior to this one, right? How they think about brands is very, very different. And they believe that brand trust is hugely important, right? And that's something that they use as a proxy to determine which brand they seek. But this is one of the reasons why you're seeing a huge increase in the number of brands on places like Instagram, right? And what they're buying and where they're buying it from and things like that. So you're talking about major brands, right? Think about Coca-Cola and Starbucks and Levi's and Nike and those type of brands, or even luxury brands. The 1/3 of them are saying they will stop buying their preferred products if they lose trust in that brand, right? So this is really, really important in terms of how this consumer base is evolving. Next, we'll talk a little bit about Foot Locker and what we are doing in the space. Again, from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of things that we're doing from a digital standpoint. I won't spend as much time on that today. We have a lot of new technologies, whether that's payment technologies with companies like Afterpay and Klarna, where we're finding these consumers find it much easier to buy from us when they have an installment-based system to buy from, for example, right? But the reality is that our biggest change that's happened in the last 3 months or 6 months has been a commitment that we've made to Black culture globally. And that globally is a really important piece here. Most companies have done this, but they've done it to be focused on US only or North America only. And there are limitations of trying to do something like this in the European world or other parts of the globe, because it's not as easy or required for people to actually talk about disclose their ethnicity, for example. So, when we talk about people of color, we talk about diversity. I think that's become important everywhere in the world, but how you implement it, how you support it has really changed. But the biggest thing is that Foot Locker as a company has committed $200 million over the next 5 years to improve the life of Black businesses, our Black employees, and partner with organizations that improve and support Black Lives Matters, right? So this includes investing in Black-owned businesses that support youth culture, which is really what the company is much more about. To give you a sense of it, about over 40% of our global workforce is people of color, and much more so even in stores than in the office environment, although we are fairly diverse and probably more diverse than many other companies out there, even in the office environment. So this is not just smart business for us. This is not just something we feel passionately about, but this is who we are, right? So we have that mix, and we are around the table when we look around. It's our consumers, it's our employees, it's our leadership team, it's our board. Every part of our organization has that sort of diversity, and we're kind of proud of that. In addition to that, I'll call out one of the other pieces. Education is a big element of this, and I'll use one example. So we invested in a company called Pensole Footwear Design Academy based out of Portland. a guy named Dwayne, who's the founder of that company. He obviously teaches people how to design footwear, how to kind of, the creative side of things. But one of the things we're doing is we've significantly increased the amount of funding so he can educate a lot more people who don't have the means on the design of footwear. And so we can actually make this a career for them. So this is a perfect example of where you use that sort of analogy of, teach them how to fish rather than feeding them fish. And that, they're very passionate about footwear. They really care about the design. They really care about other aspects of the sneakers. But one way to get them involved is to get them involved in the industry itself. And and for us, one way of doing that with Pensole is to provide them scholarships to learn about how you can design footwear. Another thing I want to talk a little bit about is our campaign in Europe. We are running this campaign right now, and we'll continue to do this through the holiday season. And the campaign really reads to "Shoes don't change the world, you do." It's something that's really resonating with our customer base, and it's really more about empowerment. It's more about actually realizing that it's not about the sneakers you wear. It's about the culture that we live in, and we all want to build a much more inclusive culture. I'm going to try and play this video for you here, and then after that, I can start to take some questions as you have them. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and start to, or at least think about what questions you have. In the meantime, I will try and see if I can get this to full screen and play the video. Together. Okay, I think with that, I end the formal part of my presentation, and I'd love to open it up to Adam or to anyone who has a question.
Thank you very much indeed, Vijay. That was much appreciated. Very good. I've got a question before we go to our audience. You talked about, all these things you learned, the purchase of GOAT and the general kind of, the move, brilliantly illustrated with your son's own kind of falling into the sneakerhead character. But I'm curious, how much of what you know now do you feed back to your suppliers? So what does that relationship look like?
No, that relationship is huge, right? So if you think about it, we are Nike's biggest global account, and that means quite a bit. And they're one of the largest players in the industry. We have a really good relationship with Adidas. We have a really good relationship with Puma, Converse, Asics, New Balance, and all the brands that are kind of in that sneaker space. And for them, they're always interested in knowing what's happening with their consumers. So they design the consumers they design the products with the consumers in mind. And we are that missing link to get them additional insights into the consumer. So we probably meet with most of our brands about 3 to 4 times a year. And during those 3 to 4 times a year, we are actually briefing into them our requirements, which are really coming to us from our consumers, what we're hearing from the stores, what we're hearing from our digital experiences, what we're hearing from the feedback that they leave us. And then that goes into the creation of the new product. Now, it's not as short a cycle as one would imagine. It's not, you think that apparel supply chains can be a little bit shorter, but sneaker and footwear supply chains are still typically, 6 months plus. So it's not like we can make the changes immediately. But I will tell you that all of the big vendors and brands are trying to invest in their supply chains to make it more agile. And this is even prior to COVID, and that's only gotten sped up with everything that's happened because of the COVID impact.
Thank you very much indeed. I feel a little bit like a Saturday television show, Vijay, because you said you meet with your brands 4 or 5 times a year. You're about to meet with one of them a lot sooner than that. We have our first question. It's Jessica from Nike. Good morning, Jessica. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good
morning, everyone.
What's your question for Vijay?
I was very proud to see some of those Air Jordans on that picture. That was very, very cool. I guess one of the questions I had was around with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we're seeing that consumers are looking for much more than product. I think you've mentioned it, so the purpose-driven companies. But we also see that they want to stand for mindfulness, sustainability. And so what are some of those elements that you think we can work on collectively to sort of change that within our industry? So I was curious to see sort of more of a service offering perspective, maybe rather than product of what the consumer is looking for.
Yeah, and again, I'm a big believer, just like I started the story with my own personal story and my son's story. I think all of these stories start from within, right? So I will just say this to you in a roundabout way to answer the question as well. If you think about what's happened in the last 6 months, for me personally, right, I made a conscious decision that I was going to spend more time, spending more time doing, meditating every day. I had a goal of kind of trying to eat healthier, work out more. I've lost a ton of weight in the last 6 or 8 months. But the reason that's important is because I also want to lead by example, right? You can't have a healthy mind and reduce your mental stress without a healthy body. So I think they're very much related. And I think the way for me, at least, is to lead by example with my employees. It starts from me, right? And then that has turned around in my leadership team. We kind of had a similar kind of a goal for everybody to get healthier. We actually then did, believe it or not, a virtual offsite with a mindfulness coach, for example. And that was pretty eye-opening for many people. Also, I think one of the things you have to do as a leader is take a step away from the business rather than the tendency in crisis is, and we did do that in the initial part of the crisis, everybody jumps in with both feet, right? But there is a sense that you have to kind of take a step back because what's happening is you're starting to step on your employees' toes. And more than just the toes at that point, you're probably starting to step on their heads, to be honest with you, because every day you're talking about what the crisis looks like, what's the update, which country is opening, who got, what happened, who's the new team that, the store that closed yesterday, when the category 3 cleaning is going to happen, when you're going to, send the employees in there. And it just becomes a sort of virtual downward spiral that each of us get down to being a project manager to the nth degree, so to speak. So I would say a lot of it starts with me is kind of my short answer. But from a consumer perspective, what that's done is that's filtered down to my leadership team. From my leadership team, it's filtered down to our field teams. Our field teams is filtered down to our store managers, and from our store managers to our employees. But we provided a lot of additional resources from a mindfulness and a mental well-being perspective. We've also shortened our hours of when the stores are open in most of the countries and cities that we're open in Europe, again to help with that. We are providing other forms of support to the employees. We actually paid everybody in Europe right through the crisis 100% of what that they would have been owed as an employee. So we're very proud of some of these small accomplishments. But I do honestly believe it starts with leadership, and it starts with changes that we are making ourselves before we kind of try to get others to change around us.
Thank you very much indeed, Vijay. Jessica, before we go, I'll let you know, continuing on the sneakerhead theme, my son is also a big fan of sneakers. He's just got his first job, saved up his first month's pay packet, bought a pair of original Air Jordans, I think, the red and white ones.
Lovely.
There you go. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica. I hope to hear from you again. Next, we have Jerome from Sephora. Good morning, Jerome. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry to wear a mask. It's the way we are supposed to be in Paris in the office of Sephora there.
Of course.
My question is on the data, coming back to the data you said, can you give us some examples of the way you use data to share with brands and the way you use this to improve your business with your suppliers and so on? Very specific objectives or very specific examples you can share.
Example, just to make sure I understood the question correctly, it's how we share data with our brands. So back to our vendors, is that what you mean?
Yeah, how do you share and how do you use it with those vendors?
I'm actually not allowed to share too much about this, but what I will say is what I just said earlier in terms of, we do have agreements with different vendors at different levels in terms of what level of data we share, whether it's just, point of sale data, whether it's price data, whether it's location-based data, all of that kind of stuff. But it is on it sort of is not necessarily 100% consistent across our entire portfolio. So I get worried about commenting on it. But the idea ultimately is we're building a partnership where we have pretty deep data sharing agreements with many of our vendors, and that data then helps them make much better product decisions. I'll just leave it at that. But they literally, if you think about the data, it can be anything. It can be, what we bought, which store we sold it in, which channel we sold it through, what price point did we sell it at, what does it look like by city, by country, by zip code. There's no limit to, you can imagine what this data can look like. And then I guess what I would say there is that we have strategic partnerships with many of our vendors where we find ways to synthesize that data and share it with our vendors to figure out, to give them insights into what's really changing in the marketplace. So ultimately, I believe where the market is moving, for example, is today, one place that there's a lot of data sharing kind of happening is in the concept of not just, there could be long-term more loyalty sharing. So for example, we built a store in Washington Heights in New York, where you could walk into a Foot Locker store and use your Nike app to make purchases. And as a Nike member, loyalty member, you can actually get special privileges inside a Foot Locker store, right? So that's some of that is almost real-time data sharing, as an example. Another thing that's working, and I would say is more further ahead in Europe than in the US, is inventory sharing, right? So on one hand, some brands like Nike and many of other vendors do not sell on Amazon and on marketplaces. On the other hand, they want to leverage their partners and their website to be able to sell their inventory on our website as well. So I'm not talking about the inventory that I've already bought that's in my warehouse, but I'm talking about inventory that's sitting in their DC that I can show on my website and sell to the customer. So it comes in all kinds of different shapes and forms, but hopefully those are good examples to get you thinking about it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Jerome. Much appreciated. Thank you, Vijay. We have time for one last question. I think we have Bryn from Adidas. Bryn, are you there?
Wow. I didn't know I was having a vendor meeting over here.
It's all your vendors. Bryn, how are you, sir?
Pretty good, yourselves?
Yeah, very well, thank you. What's your question for Vijay, sir?
First of all, thanks, Vijay, for presenting. Really enjoyed it. The question I've got for you revolves around the customer segmentation you're focusing on. I think it's a really bold move, and I totally get why you're going for a customer base that's got a probably more future-thinking mindset. But in doing that, do you risk alienating some of your previous customers or other consumer groups? And did you guys consider that when you sort of doubled down on it?
Absolutely. That's a really, really good question. And again, I would say that, you have to be clear on who your customer is. And there's no doubt that even as we've run some of the campaigns, or even the video that you just saw, that we did see a small uptick in the number of people who sort of stopped following us and things like that. But you have to kind of go further, right? I mean, if you look at, I'll use Nike as the best example on that as well. When they were doing their campaign with Colin Kaepernick, who's an American football player, so probably not as relevant from a EMEA example. But hopefully most of you know the name, and most of you know who he is and how he used to play for the San Francisco 49ers. And was essentially is no longer part of the NFL because he was, I guess, kneeling during the national anthems and taking a stand against sort of discrimination. And what happened initially when Nike ran that campaign, there was a lot of negative criticism. There were some people who were burning Nike sneakers and things like that on the streets. But ultimately, the customers who stuck with them, the customers who went and bought more with them, are the customers you're targeting. So if you really break it down, yes, you will lose a few customers, but I believe most of the customers that we are talking to, that we want to talk to, that are the Gen Y and the Gen Z customers, are the ones who can relate to what we want to do and what we're doing as a purpose-driven organization. And most of the customers we're potentially losing are probably, usually, and again, I don't want to generalize, but in many cases, they can be not part of that subset and be part of an older consumer that's not necessarily from a culture and overall standpoint, doesn't share those views as a typical Gen Z customer. So again, it is difficult, but I think that's part of the things that consumers want to see is brands taking a stand, and in that stand, there's definitely risk involved. And again, I want to let me be clear. My first purpose is to be as inclusive as possible. But then the purpose of the company is to stand for what is right and what we think is right, what our employees think is right, what our consumers think is right, right? So again, and I think you can do both. So the idea here is not to try to exclude anyone at all, but stand up for things that you believe in. And will that be upsetting to a few people? Probably. But the reality is that that's something not only our consumers expect, but my employees expect from me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the question, Bryn. I am glad, despite the sign behind you, that you decided not to wear your pajamas all day today. Thank you, Bryn. Lovely to speak to you, and I hope to speak for you again. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Vijay, look, I really, really appreciate it. One last sort of thing before you go. How important is it then, do you think, because all these decisions you made and that lovely kind of closing statement about we have to be inclusive, but we have to stand for what the brand stands for. How important is it you have your data house in order to be able to make those decisions?
I mean, it is important that we have our data house in order, and a lot of the decision goes back to, so it's not subjective, it's actually based on real consumer data and insights. So in that sense, it is. On the other hand, it's not that, if you focus on the Gen Z consumers, they're not that hard to read, right? There's been a lot published about them. There's a lot of surveys we do that are very consistent with what they say to other people and what's out there in market research. And there's a lot of nuances in terms of how you communicate. But I think the data doesn't necessarily get in the way of it, because they're pretty clear and pretty vocal as a generation on who they are and what they stand for. So I don't think they leave much in doubt that you need to kind of go back and peel the data back further to take a stand in many of these situations that I'm talking about, especially at the macro level.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Vijay. Really appreciate you spending the time. Have a great rest of the day. Great rest of the summit. Thank you.
Appreciate it.